I still cringe when I think about that moment, the way Arthur's palms slammed down on the mahogany table in front of the mayor. He didn't just tap it, he thwacked it, making the silver pens jump, and I knew instantly we were done for. It was the annual charity gala, the one night a year, where I tried to pretend our life was normal, manageable, even respectable. Arthur hated these events. He hated being on display, hated making small talk. But he was also fiercely competitive, and the main auction item was a rare, first edition poetry book he desperately wanted. I thought, naively, that maybe the importance of the book and the public setting would keep him anchored. I was wrong. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, but all I could smell was the slow, inevitable burn of disaster. He was fine for the first 2 hours. He wore his charm like a tailored suit, smiling, telling clever jokes, and leaning in just close enough to the city council members to make them feel important. My job, as always, was to stand slightly behind him, scanning the room, measuring his intake of wine, and anticipating the exact moment the mask would slip. I was a human crisis detector. The bidding for the book started high and quickly escalated. Arthur was obsessed, his jaw tightening with every rival bid. He got into a tense back and forth with a retired judge named Harold. When Harold raised the bid to $70,000, Arthur shot up from a seat, his chair scraping loudly across the polished floor. That's when he slammed his hand down, making the entire auction hall turn and stare. If you're still here, welcome to Voice of Jenna, a place where stories aren't just told, they're felt. Here, we dive into real emotions, family drama, quiet heartbreaks, unexpected twists, and the moments that change us. So sit back, relax, and let me tell you what happened next. That's it, Arthur roared, his voice shaking the polite quiet of the room. I'm not playing this ridiculous game with you people. You're all just trying to humiliate me. This whole night is a setup. The mayor, bless his heart, tried to intervene, putting a calming hand on Arthur's arm. And that was the switch. Arthur violently shrugged off the touch, his eyes now narrowed, not at the judge, but at me. The audience, our friends, our business partners, the very pillars of the community, just sat there, frozen, their forks suspended midair. I felt the heat rising up my neck, a familiar, humiliating flush. This was the moment I stopped being Evelyn and became Arthur's designated, responsible caregiver in public. I rushed forward, pasting a bright, brittle smile on my face. My heart was pounding, but my mind was already spinning the protective narrative. I grabbed Arthur's arm, my grip tight and steady, and began apologizing to the mayor and the judge. I am so terribly sorry, gentlemen. It's the medication, you see. He's had a terrible reaction today. A sudden dizzy spell. We need to leave immediately. It was a total lie, of course. Arthur wasn't on medication. He was fueled by his own internal rage and disappointment. But the lie was crucial. It shifted the blame from his character to a medical condition, allowing the enabler, me, to step in as the protector of his reputation. As I steered his rigid, angry body toward the exit, his humiliation turned quickly into accusation. He twisted his arm free, stumbling slightly, and leaned in close to my ear, his breath smelling of expensive Merlot. He didn't care that dozens of people were still watching us, murmuring now. "Look at you," he hissed, his eyes blazing with self-pity. "Patronizing me, treating me like a child. You forced me to come here, Evelyn. You knew I was on the edge. You did this on purpose." I stopped walking. We were right by the double doors, in plain view of everyone. I felt like I was standing naked under a spotlight. I had just saved him from a devastating public scene, and his immediate response was to attack me, to make my necessary intervention the new source of his victimization. I tried to whisper, to keep the damage contained. "Arthur, please. Let's just get home. Everyone is looking." That was his cue for the ultimate weapon, the one that crippled my wound, my deep-seated fear of being responsible for his suffering. His eyes welled up instantly, the rage draining away, replaced by an agonizing, innocent despair. He clutched my hand, squeezing it tight, his voice cracking just loud enough for the people closest to us to hear. I can't believe you're judging me, Evelyn. Don't you see how hard I try? This is what you do to me. You push me until I break. I know you hate it, he choked out, leaning his head against my shoulder for maximum effect. But I swear, I'm only like this because I love you so much. There it was. The toxic justification. The thesis line that held my life together and kept me locked away. It meant, I am only destructive because my feelings for you are too intense. Your suffering is proof of my profound commitment. And I bought it hook, line, and sinker. I believed that his chaos was a testament to his love. The rage, the humiliation, the financial recklessness, it was all just collateral damage from a love that was too big for him to handle. That's what I told myself. That's what I let him tell the world. I stopped trying to leave. I wrapped my arms around him, holding his shaking body, and whispered the familiar, terrible promise. It's okay, Arthur. I know. I understand. I'm here. As I let him out into the cold night air, the shame was overwhelming. But beneath the shame, a small, cold knot of something else was starting to form. For the first time, I didn't just feel duty. I felt a chilling, profound exhaustion. I had just spent an entire evening anticipating, protecting, lying, and apologizing, and my reward was to be accused of deliberately causing the breakdown. On the silent drive home, I looked at Arthur, slumped in the passenger seat, already seemingly oblivious to the damage he had done. He looked like a tired child. And I looked at my own hands on the steering wheel, hands that were tired of clutching, tired of controlling, tired of covering up. I thought of my life, the friends I'd pushed away, the career opportunities I'd let slide, the simple, quiet joy I hadn't felt in years. All sacrificed on the altar of this volatile, conditional love. We walked into the quiet darkness of our home. I helped him out of his coat, my movements stiff and automatic. He didn't apologize. He just shuffled toward the bedroom. Get me a brandy, Evelyn, he mumbled, already halfway to sleep. My head is pounding. I stood in the doorway, staring at his retreating back. I felt utterly drained, a dry sponge. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my stomach, that I could not keep doing this. I was dying by inches, killed by the supposed love that was meant to sustain me. I had to find a way out, or I wouldn't have a life left to save. I walked to the kitchen, but I didn't reach for the bottle of brandy. I reached for my car keys, which I had just dropped in the ceramic bowl on the counter. I looked at the dark house, the scene of so much controlled despair, and for the first time, I saw it as a cage, not a home. I knew that if I walked out, even just for an hour, the panic would erupt. He would use the phone, the messages, the desperate pleas. He would unleash the full weight of the FOG, fear, obligation, guilt, to pull me back. But the silence, the sheer weight of the expectation that I would automatically respond, felt heavier than any scream. I made it to the front door, my hand on the cold brass knob, ready to bolt. But then, I heard a sound from the bedroom, a soft, pitiful moan. Not a yell, not a threat, but a sound of genuine, helpless distress. I hesitated, my heart tearing in two. I knew that moan. It was the sound that always worked, the sound that disarmed the protector and reactivated the enabler. I looked back toward the hallway, already calculating my retreat, ready to run back and check on him, to put the night's disaster behind us and resume my post. But then my eyes caught the hallway mirror, and for a split second, I saw not the tired caregiver, but a frightened, fading woman who barely recognized herself. I stood there, caught between the automatic pull of duty and the sudden, terrifying opportunity for escape. Would I return to the misery that had just destroyed my public life, or would I finally choose myself? The moan came again, louder this time, a plea disguised as pain. I stood paralyzed at the front door, my hand gripping the cold brass knob, the soft, pitiful sound of Arthur's moan echoing down the dark hallway. That sound was my personal siren song, the signal that duty superseded self. It was the sound that had trained me for years to drop everything and rush back to the cage. But then, I saw the reflection in the hallway mirror again. The fading woman. And I remembered the mayor, the slamming hand, the public shame, and the chilling hiss. I'm only like this because I love you so much. That thesis, that justification, felt suddenly heavier than the pull of the moan. It felt like a stone pulling me under. I took a slow, deep breath, tasting the dust of the carpet and the stale air of a house that had witnessed too many staged dramas. I did not turn around. I turned the knob, stepped out, and gently closed the door behind me. The quiet of the street was immense. It was the deepest silence I had heard in years. I got into my car and drove, not to a friend's house, not to a hotel, but just drove until the familiar streets of our neighborhood blurred into the anonymity of the highway. I didn't stop until I found a brightly lit, sterile 24-hour diner where the light was harsh and the coffee was strong. I sat in that plastic booth, staring into the dark, reflecting surface of the window, and I did the one thing I had forbidden myself for years. I stopped managing Arthur's emotions and started cataloging my own loss. This was the start of the cracks in the shield, the move from enabler to observer. My wound, the fear of abandonment, had made me cling to the identity of the indispensable caregiver. I was so busy preventing Arthur from collapsing that I hadn't noticed I was crumbling myself. I looked down at my hands and saw the faint tremors that had become a constant companion. My health was shot. Perpetual exhaustion, acid indigestion, chronic, low-grade anxiety that felt like humming wires beneath my skin. But the real loss was professional. I had once been a sharp, talented manager in my field, poised for partnership. Arthur, however, always seemed to require my attention right when a crucial deadline hit. He'd accuse me of prioritizing meaningless office gossip over his well-being. Once, I had to fly out of state for an emergency client meeting, a huge opportunity for my firm. The morning I was supposed to leave, Arthur staged a meltdown, claiming he couldn't find his passport, which he didn't need, and that the airline was secretly canceling all my tickets. I missed the flight. My boss eventually stopped putting me forward for important projects. It wasn't just the career. My relationship with my daughter, Clara, had grown thin and strained. She had tried to intervene, gently at first. "Mom, why are you letting him talk to you like that?" she'd asked after one particularly nasty phone call. But I'd shut her down, reciting the thesis line, "He's just so sensitive, Clara. He loves me deeply. It just comes out wrong." Clara gave up. She kept her distance, an act of self-protection that felt like the deepest loneliness to me. Now, sitting in the diner, I realized I had chosen Arthur's volatile control over Clara's stable love. I pulled out my phone, and instead of checking for Arthur's inevitable stream of desperate texts, I did something I hadn't done in maybe a decade. I looked up the words emotional abuse and codependency. The stories I found online were horrifyingly familiar. The phrases jumped out at me: walking on eggshells, loss of self, the need to be needed. I read about FOG, fear, obligation, guilt, the three weapons Arthur had perfected. I was the textbook definition of the enabler. I was sacrificing my life force to sustain his dysfunction. The shield I had built to protect him was, in reality, a blindfold on my own eyes. But it was one specific comment on a support forum that pierced through my denial. When you rush back to fix them, you are not showing love. You are feeding their certainty that they don't have to change because you will always manage the consequences for them. That truth hit me like a physical blow. The humiliation at the gala wasn't an isolated incident. It was the predictable consequence of my enabling. I had taught Arthur that no matter how publicly or privately destructive he became, I would always clean up the mess and apologize for him. I was managing the world for him, thereby ensuring he would never have to manage himself. I stayed in that diner until the sun came up. I hadn't slept, but I felt strangely, terrifyingly awake. I had to know what was happening at home. The anticipation was agonizing. I knew Arthur would have escalated. When I finally drove back, hours later, the house was silent. He was in the living room, exactly where I expected him to be, surrounded by the fallout of the night, but clean, dressed, and calm. He hadn't broken anything. He hadn't called the police. He was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, a cup of untouched tea on the side table. He looked up at me, and his expression wasn't one of panicked relief. It was one of cold, controlled fury, tinged with feigned pity. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," he said, his voice flat. He didn't ask where I had been. He didn't ask if I was okay. He went straight to the attack. "I had to call Clara," he lied smoothly, "because you were gone, and I didn't know what to tell her. I told her you were under terrible stress, having some sort of breakdown. She was worried sick, Evelyn. Worried sick. You are selfish, running off like that when you know how sensitive I am. I spent all night alone, terrified you'd harmed yourself." The shock wasn't just the lie, it was the speed and precision of his counterattack. He had turned my act of survival into an act of cruelty and selfishness, and he had pulled my own daughter into his manufactured drama. He had successfully reframed my exhaustion as my breakdown. "She called me," he continued, leaning forward, his eyes boring into mine. "She was crying. She thinks you've completely lost it." I had to reassure her. I had to tell her that even though you abandoned me, I'm the one who is holding things together. My stomach turned over. I had wanted to protect Clara, and he had used her as a weapon to punish me. The damage I had incurred in that relationship was not just to myself. It was spreading, infecting the one pure relationship I had left. I looked at him, sitting there, perfectly composed, the picture of the calm victim. And I realized that my presence had been her only true distress. My absence had been her only true need. He needed me to manage the chaos, but he didn't need my actual well-being. This quiet, controlled malice was far more devastating than the public rage. It was the moment I fully saw the pattern, the performance of vulnerability used to inflict maximum pain. The enabler died in that moment, replaced by the grieving but determined observer. "I did not have a breakdown, Arthur," I said, my voice low and shaking, but steady. "I went for a drive because I was terrified of what was happening to me." He smiled faintly, a cold, empty smile. "Ah, Evelyn. You always make it about you, don't you? It's all right. I forgive you. Come here." He patted the cushion next to him, the gesture of a benevolent king allowing his subject back into favor. But I did not move. I stood my ground, my tired feet rooted to the spot. The shame was gone, replaced by a cold, righteous certainty. This was the turning point. I would not sit down. I would not apologize. I would not enable the lie. I looked at him and said the hardest words of my life, words that signaled the beginning of the end of the toxic justification. "I am not coming over there, Arthur. And I am not apologizing for needing air. We need to talk about what happened last night and what is happening to us." The air instantly froze. His face went through a terrifying transformation. The pity dissolved, the calm vanished, and the raw, aggressive need to control flared up. He knew I had crossed a line. He stood up, his gaze intense and dangerous. "There is nothing to talk about, Evelyn," he said, taking a step toward me. "Except why you are refusing to come home and comfort the man who loves you." He took another step, closing the distance. "I need you to tell me right now, Evelyn. Are you abandoning me?" I took a breath. I had to hold the line, not just with words, but with my physical posture. I had to reject the victim role entirely. I had to prepare for the inevitable explosion. "I am not abandoning you," I insisted, my voice firmer now. "I am setting a boundary. I am choosing health over crisis. And I am demanding truth." Arthur reached out, his hand grasping my arm, not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to convey absolute ownership and prevent me from moving. He lowered his voice to a menacing whisper. "You don't understand the forces you are unleashing, Evelyn. I am only controlled by your presence. If you remove yourself, I cannot guarantee what will happen next." This was the final escalation, the implicit threat of self-harm, used to freeze my every movement. I knew I had to run, but his grip was surprisingly strong. He was pressing the thesis line into my skin, forcing me back into the role of the terrified enabler. I had to break his hold, not just physically, but psychologically. I needed a clear path to separation, a clear physical space to begin the work of recovery. "Let go of me, Arthur," I ordered, trying to pull my arm free. He just tightened his grip, his eyes gleaming with the triumph of his control. "Tell me you won't leave again and I'll let go." I didn't answer. I just pulled harder. He laughed then, a short, sharp, terrifying sound. "You can't do it, can you, Evelyn? You can't leave. Because you know that I'm only like this because I love you so much." I wrenched my arm free from Arthur's grasp, the friction leaving a pink mark on my skin. He was left standing there, his hands suspended in the air, his face a sudden mask of disbelief. That break, that small physical act of defiance, was the first hammer blow to the prison walls. It was the moment the observer decided to become the survivor. "No," I said, backing away slowly, putting the length of the sofa between us. My voice was no longer shaking with fear, but vibrating with a cold, desperate resolve. "I won't tell you that, Arthur. I am not apologizing for needing air. And I am not managing this crisis for you anymore." He watched me, his mind racing to find the next weapon. He tried the pity first, the tears welling up in his eyes instantly, ready to deploy. "Evelyn, please. Don't punish me for my sensitivity. Can't you see I'm afraid? I need you. I feel abandoned." "I see the fear, Arthur," I said, walking briskly toward the hallway closet where I kept my suitcases, "but I also see the choice. You chose to humiliate me last night. You chose to lie to Clara about my well-being this morning. And I choose to leave." That word, leave, finally triggered the pure, unadulterated rage I had been anticipating. He lunged forward, not toward me, but toward the nearest point of destruction, the antique marble lamp beside the armchair. He grabbed it and raised it above his head, his eyes wild. "You take one step closer to those bags, and I will smash this into a million pieces, and I will blame you for every splinter." This was the old script, the one that guaranteed my immediate return to compliance. But the revelation in the diner, the sting of the lie he told Clara, had changed the internal calculus. The lamp didn't matter. The shards didn't matter. The threat didn't matter. Only my own physical safety and emotional integrity mattered. I was stepping fully into Act 2, the journey. "Smash it, Arthur," I said, my voice unnervingly calm, opening the closet door and pulling out my sturdy, wheeled suitcase. "You will smash the lamp, and then you will have to explain to the insurance company and the police why you did it. That choice is yours. Mine is to pack my clothes." I turned my back on him. It was the riskiest, most terrifying move I had ever made. I heard a choked sound behind me, followed by a heavy, defeated thump. Not the sound of glass shattering, but the sound of the lamp being put down, hard, on the carpet. The threat had failed. My refusal to manage the consequence had disarmed the weapon. I spent the next hour packing, methodical and silent. He followed me from room to room, transforming rapidly from the rageful monster to the pitiful victim. He tried bargaining. "Where will you go, Evelyn? You can't just leave. You have nowhere to stay. Let's talk about the finances. It's not safe." He tried shaming. "You're just like your mother, always running away when things get tough. I thought you were better than that." I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I simply packed, repeating a mantra in my head. I am choosing me. I am choosing health. My destination was the small, furnished apartment Clara's friend was subletting for a few months. I had quietly arranged it the week before, using a lie of my own, telling Clara I needed a quiet place to work on a big, secret project. It was my secret sanctuary, a place free of his emotional gravity. The moment came when I zipped the last bag. I stood at the threshold, looking at him. He was standing in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the familiar objects of our shared life, but looking utterly alone, his arms hanging uselessly at his sides. "I am not coming back, Arthur," I stated, the finality of the words sinking into the heavy silence. "I am leaving to find safety and peace. I will contact you through my lawyer about the separation of our belongings." That word, lawyer, was the only one that truly jolted him. It signaled that this wasn't a tantrum or a manipulation. This was a formal, unstoppable decision. "Lawyer," he whispered, his eyes wide. "Evelyn, you can't be serious." We're not divorcing. You're just stressed. You're overreacting. You're giving up on us, and you're going to regret it. I regret wasting 20 years believing I could save you by sacrificing myself. I countered, and that was the first full articulation of the antithesis line, whispered only to myself as I turned and wheeled my bags toward the door. I can love you without destroying myself in the process. I didn't look back. I got into my car and drove straight to the little apartment. It was small, clean, and perfectly anonymous. When I locked the door behind me, the silence was immediate and absolute. It was the absence of sound, the absence of expectation, the absence of panic. I sat down on the floor, the exhaustion finally catching up to me, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry without having to hide it, without having to stop and manage the feelings of someone else. I cried for the life I had lost and for the courage I had just found. The first few days in the secret sanctuary were devoted to setting and testing the first crucial boundary. Arthur's texts and calls came in a torrent. First frantic pleas, then vicious attacks, then pathetic promises. I kept my phone on silent, checking the messages only once a day with a growing, cold detachment. He sent photos of himself looking distraught, claiming sickness, threatening to call the police to report me as missing. Every message was designed to trigger the FOG, to make me question my sanity and rush back to apologize. But every time I saw a new message, I consciously recalled the image of him holding the lamp, the coldness in his eyes when he lied about Clara. I was inoculating myself against his drama by injecting a dose of cold, hard truth. Then came the first true moment of initial empowerment. On the fourth day, I called Clara. I didn't tell her where I was, only that I was safe. "Mom," she said, her voice strained, "Arthur called me again. He said he was at the hospital, that he'd collapsed and you wouldn't take his calls." I was ready to drive there. Is he okay? What is going on? The lie about the hospital. The calculated use of a serious medical threat to compel my return. This was worse than the public humiliation. "Clara," I said, choosing my words carefully, simply. "Arthur is fine. He is at home. He is not in the hospital. He has been using crisis and false alarm to make us both feel obligated to manage him. I am establishing distance because I need to stop participating in his drama. And I need you to know that you do not need to participate in it either." I waited for the judgment, the worry, the pushback. Instead, Clara started to weep, but not the anxious, worried tears I was used to. These were tears of relief. "Oh, Mom," she whispered. "Thank you. Thank you for saying that." I thought I was losing my mind, trying to figure out if he was sick or just acting. I felt so guilty. In that moment, I realized my escape wasn't just my own. It was an act of protection for my daughter. I was modeling the very boundaries she needed to set for herself. My protector role had begun, not with a flourish, but with a quiet conversation on a borrowed phone. I ended the call, feeling a profound, unfamiliar sense of lightness. I had faced the hardest truth, the pain of leaving, and found that the peace on the other side was real. I had articulated my truth and protected someone else from the lie. I spent the next week in that sanctuary, working with a therapist over the phone, reading everything I could find on setting boundaries, and, most importantly, learning to live in the simple, mundane quiet of my own company. No explosions. No demands. No need to apologize for my own existence. I was rediscovering the simple joy of my own autonomy. I knew, however, that the most devastating confrontation was yet to come. Arthur was a master strategist. He hadn't pulled out his final, most effective weapon. His silence, his feigned collapse, was just a test. I knew he would try to lure me back with a promise that had kept me tethered for years, the one that had always guaranteed my return to the toxic cycle. I knew he was preparing to mention the inheritance, the reward, the final reason I was supposed to endure. I sat in my apartment, staring at the phone, feeling the tension build. He hadn't mentioned it yet, but he would. And I knew that when he did, I would have to be ready to risk everything for the truth. He was waiting for me to break. He was waiting for me to remember the fortune that was promised. The fear was a cold, sharp point. The inheritance was the only thing that could still pull me back to the life of the enabler. It was the promise of a future that felt too valuable to lose. I felt a sudden, desperate urge to call my estranged brother-in-law, the only person who might know the truth about that long-promised money the man Arthur had forbidden me to contact. I knew I needed to know the truth before Arthur used the lie one last time. But I was too afraid to make the call. Too afraid of what I would discover. Too afraid that the truth would shatter the last, tiny hope of an escape with a financial safety net. I was caught between two terrors, the terror of staying and the terror of leaving empty-handed. I had to choose. The phantom weight of the promised inheritance was suffocating me, even in the safety of my little apartment. It was the shiny hook dangling in the water, the one reason Arthur believed I would eventually swim back to his side. That money, that supposed security for our future, had been the constant undercurrent beneath the toxic justification. Endure the chaos now, Evelyn, and you'll be rewarded later. I was staring at my phone, the screen dark, struggling with the irrational urge to call Arthur and demand to know about the money, when the phone finally lit up. But it wasn't Arthur. It was an unfamiliar number, long distance. I answered, my heart hammering against my ribs. Hello? Evelyn? Is that really you? It's Mark. It was Arthur's brother, Mark. The one man Arthur had systematically alienated and forbidden me from ever speaking to. The one person who had successfully escaped the family's toxic orbit decades ago, and the one person I had desperately avoided contacting out of fear of crossing Arthur's final boundary. Mark, I whispered, relief and dread washing over me. How did you get this number? Your daughter, Clara, he said, his voice slow and heavy. She reached out to me, worried sick after Arthur's theatrics. I told her I couldn't intervene, but I asked her to give you this number, just in case. She said you'd finally left. He didn't offer sympathy or congratulations. His tone was matter-of-fact, the voice of a man who had seen this drama play out many times before. His calm presence cut through the anxiety that had been choking me. I knew this was my chance. This was the moment to verify the one thing that still held sway over me. Mark, I need to ask you something, I started, my voice tight. It's about the inheritance. Arthur's grandmother's trust. He always said it was substantial, that it came due next year when he turned 65. Is that true? Because if I leave, I'm walking away from everything we built, and that money was supposed to be our safety net. There was a long, static-filled silence on the line. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I was braced for the confirmation that I was about to make a huge, financially devastating mistake. Then Mark's answer came, and it was a sharp, clinical stroke of pure, cold truth, the cold revelation that shattered the final pillar of the toxic relationship. Evelyn, he said, with an air of weary finality. There is no trust fund. There never has been. Not in the way Arthur described. Our grandmother left a very modest sum to be divided between her children 30 years ago. Arthur spent his portion within 6 months, claiming he was investing it. The money he promised you, the big payoff waiting next year? It's a complete fantasy. It hasn't existed for decades. The silence returned, but this time, it felt vast, empty, and utterly terrifying. Not because of financial loss, but because of the sheer scale of the lie. The lie wasn't a recent invention. It was the 40-year-old financial foundation of his control. Every sacrifice I had made, every humiliation I had endured, every time I had accepted the toxic thesis, it was all predicated on a reward that was never real. I felt a wave of nausea, followed by a rush of clean, searing anger. Not the volatile rage Arthur specialized in, but the righteous fury of the profoundly betrayed. He hadn't just lied to me. He had used that lie to systematically steal my ambition, my relationships, and 2 decades of my life. The wound wasn't just my fear of being alone. The wound was the colossal lie I had chosen to believe. Why? I managed to rasp out. Why the lie? Why keep it going for so long? Because it worked, Evelyn, Mark explained, his voice devoid of emotion. It gave him the ultimate leverage. If you endure his chaos, you're a martyr. If you leave him, you're a financial fool. He didn't need the money. He needed the promise of the money to ensure your eternal compliance. It's the perfect toxic loop. I thanked Mark, my voice sounding distant and hollow, and hung up the phone. I walked to the kitchen and stood at the counter, staring at the bright Formica surface. The realization was liberating, but also utterly devastating. The toxic justification, "I'm only like this because I love you so much," was proven to be 100% manipulative performance, anchored by a complete fraud. I sat down at the table and finally wrote out the antithesis line in my journal, not as a whisper of hope, but as a roaring declaration of truth. I can love you without destroying myself in the process. The revelation stripped away the final shred of doubt, pushing me fully into the role of the empowered survivor. I was no longer grieving a failed love. I was recognizing a successful escape from a con artist. I immediately called my lawyer. I didn't mince words. I told him I wanted a formal, permanent no-contact order and a legal statement of separation immediately. I gave him Mark's number for verification on the family history. I wanted the break to be legally sealed and irreversible. The very next day, a package arrived at my door. No return address. It was heavy, and I opened it with shaking hands, anticipating one last emotional manipulation. Inside, there was a single item, a leather-bound family photo album, nearly empty, except for one page. On that page was the small, charred photograph of us that Arthur had thrown into the fire on the night I left, now taped back together with a crude piece of medical tape. Beneath the photograph, scrawled in his elegant handwriting, was a note. It wasn't a threat of violence or a plea for reconciliation. It was a single, chilling sentence designed to reignite my deepest fear, now that the financial one was gone. The note read, "I was visited by a dear old friend of yours today, Evelyn. You remember William, don't you? He's looking for you. I told him you were quite well, and that you needed someone strong to lean on right now. You won't be alone for long. I've sent him your new address." William. The name brought a cold dread that was sharper and more immediate than any financial betrayal. William was an unstable, intensely jealous former partner from my past, a man who had caused me genuine fear and whom Arthur knew I was terrified of crossing paths with again. By invoking William, Arthur wasn't just threatening me, he was leveraging an external, real-world danger to force me back under his protection. He was using my past fears to secure his future control. The message was clear. If you are alone, I cannot protect you from him, and you need me to survive. I looked down at the address written in the note, the address of my secret sanctuary, a secret only 3 people knew. Arthur had clearly been tracking me. I was exposed, and the stakes had just been raised from emotional control to physical safety. I had to move, and I had to move immediately. The name William felt like a stone dropping into a still pool, sending ripples of pure, primal fear through the peace I had finally found. Arthur didn't need to shout. He just needed to use the one weapon that could shatter my hard-won courage, the threat of an external, real-world danger, a known ghost from my painful past. By sending that note, and especially by including the address of my secret sanctuary, Arthur wasn't begging. He was making an outright move to control me through terror. His message was, "You are vulnerable without me. Your liberation is impossible." I didn't waste a second. The calm, methodical nature of the empowered survivor took over, replacing the panicked enabler. The revelation of the inheritance lie in Chapter 4 had given me the clarity. The threat of William gave me the necessary, immediate momentum. I grabbed my suitcases and my new journal. Within an hour, I had checked out of the apartment, leaving no forwarding information. I drove directly to a hotel far outside the city limits, paying in cash for the first night. The fear was a constant companion, but this time, I wasn't running to Arthur's arms for protection. I was running from his attempt to reclaim me. This was the true test of the protector, safeguarding myself against calculated malice. The next morning, I initiated the final stage of the break, reclaiming the quiet. I called my lawyer and explained the situation. He was concerned but efficient. He immediately filed the necessary documents for the formal legal separation and secured the no-contact order, establishing a clear, legal firewall between Arthur and me. This formal structure was vital. It wasn't just an emotional boundary, but a legal one, giving me recourse if Arthur ever tried to escalate beyond notes and threats. Then I called Clara. I told her I was safe and explained the danger of William, being careful to emphasize that Arthur had deliberately provided my address to an unstable man. I needed her to understand the depth of his manipulation. "Mom," Clara said, her voice filled with shock and clarity, "that's sick. He's deliberately putting you in danger to force you back. That is not love, Mom. That is pure revenge." Clara's words, "That is not love," became a balm to my soul. Hearing the antithesis line, "I can love you without destroying myself in the process," echoed by my daughter, confirmed that my new wisdom was solid, stable ground. She wasn't just supporting me, she was validating the truth. I spent the next 2 months establishing my fortress of self-trust. The quiet wasn't just the absence of Arthur's voice, it was the presence of my own. I rented a small, permanent apartment in a different part of the region, deliberately selecting a quiet, residential area. I changed my routines. I got a new phone number and only gave it to Clara, my lawyer, and Mrs. Henderson, who proved to be a surprisingly stable and kind confidant. I returned to work, not with the frenetic energy of a survivor trying to prove something, but with the steady focus of a person who finally had their internal resources back. I started accepting new, challenging projects. When stress mounted, the old me would have collapsed and felt the pull back to the dependency of the toxic relationship. The new me would stop, take 5 minutes, and remind myself, this challenge is real, manageable, and is happening because I chose it. It is not manufactured chaos. The process of integration was tedious, but profound. It meant dealing with the phantom pains of the enabling role. I still had moments when I'd catch myself scanning a room, anticipating a dramatic entrance, or holding back my opinion for fear of a volatile reaction. Each time, I had to stop and correct the behavior. I am safe. My opinion is valid. I am accountable only to myself. I started keeping a gratitude and boundary log, instead of a crisis journal. I would write down simple things I was grateful for: a quiet cup of coffee, a call from Clara, the feeling of safety in my new home. But most importantly, I logged every time I successfully upheld a boundary. Example entry: colleague asked me to cover her weekend shift last minute. Old Evelyn would have said yes and resented it. New Evelyn said, "I can't this weekend, but I hope you find cover." Felt a pang of guilt fog, but held the line. Peace intact. This log showed me, in black and white, that my liberation wasn't a one-time event. It was a daily series of choices. Every no to a demand from the outside world was a yes to my own well-being. The final piece of the reclaiming the quiet phase was realizing that Arthur's ultimate threat, "You will be alone forever," was the most significant lie of all. In my fear, I had defined alone as abandoned and unprotected. In truth, alone meant autonomous and safe. I was no longer relying on a volatile partner to be my human shield. I was my own protector. I was building genuine, healthy connections based on mutual respect, not codependency. My relationships with Clara and Mrs. Henderson were deeper, more honest, and fundamentally peaceful. The fear of solitude was replaced by the comfort of sovereignty. One afternoon, I received a certified letter from Arthur's lawyer. It was a formal acknowledgement of the separation and a request for the division of assets. It was sterile, businesslike, and mercifully devoid of emotional manipulation. This was the final, dull confirmation that the game was over. He had retreated into the formality of the legal system, acknowledging the new firewall. I read the document and felt nothing. No victory, no sadness, just a quiet confirmation that the toxic past was finally quarantined. I instructed my lawyer to handle the division fairly and quickly, cutting the final material cord. I walked to my window and looked out at the street. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light on the apartment. I was sitting in my own space, enjoying my own quiet, living my own life. I was financially independent, legally protected, and emotionally sovereign. The wound was closing, and in its place was the solid foundation of wisdom. My journey was now complete, and the focus shifted from escaping the past to building a future where my story could become a beacon for others. I was no longer just a survivor. I was finally ready to be a mentor, a guide, a true protector not just of myself, but of the truth that sets others free. I found that once the incessant noise of Arthur's demands was silenced, I had a remarkable amount of energy left over. For years, I had channeled every ounce of my effort into damage control. Now, that energy was clean, focused, and ready for true investment. I began volunteering more seriously at the local support center, no longer just filing papers but training to facilitate family support meetings. The setting was simple, a circle of folding chairs in a brightly lit room. The faces were familiar, tired, anxious, etched with the same confusion and guilt I had lived with for decades. They were struggling with partners, children, or siblings who wielded dependency and chaos like a sword. My first time leading a session, I was terrified. I wasn't an expert. I was just Evelyn, the former enabler. But when a woman named Carol described her husband's dramatic cycles, the rage followed by the immediate, devastating claim of sickness, I knew exactly what to say. Carol, weeping softly, finished her story with a familiar plea. He looked at me and said, "If you leave, I'll never recover. I'm only doing these terrible things because I'm so afraid of losing you. I'm only like this because I love you so much." The room was silent, heavy with shared understanding and despair. Every person there had heard their own version of that toxic justification. I leaned forward, meeting Carol's eyes. I spoke slowly, calmly, with the quiet authority of lived experience. This wasn't therapy. This was testimonial. That sentence, "I'm only like this because I love you so much," that is the most destructive lie you will ever hear, I told her. Because it takes their choice and turns it into your duty. It makes their toxicity proof of their deep love, forcing you to endure. I lived by that lie for 20 years with Arthur. I saw several people in the room nod, their eyes wide with recognition. This was the moment I realized my story was a direct antidote. The greatest difficulty, I continued, is that we confuse endurance with strength. We think if we can just absorb enough pain, we'll somehow earn their health and our peace. But strength isn't enduring their destruction, Carol. True strength is refusing to participate in it. I then shared the antithesis line, not as a suggestion, but as a hard-won truth, the core of my protector's new role. I had to find my own counterstatement, my own truth, to pull me out of the FOG. And it was this: I can love you without destroying myself in the process. That line is your permission slip. It tells you that walking away from chaos is not cruel. It is necessary self-protection. It is the only way to model a healthy boundary, whether they choose to learn from it or not. That moment of sharing was my true liberation. I had feared that my past humiliation would define me. Instead, my wisdom was now giving me purpose. The pain of the wound was being transformed into a tangible, usable resource for others. I made a concerted effort to deepen my connection with Clara. We began a weekly ritual, a quiet dinner, just the two of us, where we talked about our jobs, our hobbies, and our futures. Everything but Arthur. Clara blossomed. She was no longer walking on eggshells around me, concerned about my stress levels or worried about the next phone call. She was comfortable, genuine, and thriving. Our relationship became the purest embodiment of healthy love, unconditional, simple, and free of emotional debt. One afternoon, Clara shared something with me that brought the journey full circle. "Mom," she said, "remember that time, years ago, when Arthur called you crazy and told you were having a breakdown and you ran off for the night? I worried so much. But then he told me you were fine, that you were just sensitive and he was taking care of you." I listened, heart tight. This was the lie from Chapter 2, the one that used her as a weapon. I believed him, Clara admitted. But when you left for good and you were honest with me and you told me, "Arthur is lying, he is fine, and I am choosing peace," that was the first time I trusted my own perception over his drama. You didn't just save yourself, Mom. You saved me from believing that lie too. You taught me what a real boundary looks like. That was my complete fulfillment of the protector role. My survival wasn't just my own happy ending, it was the start of Clara's liberation from the same toxic pattern. I was no longer haunted by the fear of William or the shame of the gala. My life was filled with simple, unremarkable events that were, to me, miracles. Reading a book without interruption, enjoying a quiet Sunday morning, having a friend call just to chat, not to relay a crisis. The final piece of the puzzle was accepting that Arthur would likely never change. I received updates through Mark, who maintained a distant, highly cautious contact. Arthur had indeed found a new caregiver, another person willing to believe the thesis line and accept the toxicity in exchange for the promise of importance. I felt a pang of sadness for that person, but no guilt, no temptation to intervene. My journey had taught me that I could not save someone who did not wish to be saved. My only task was to remain free. I realized that my greatest strength was not in resisting the external world, but in maintaining the internal truth. I was no longer defined by the wound or even the fight against it. I was defined by the life I was deliberately, lovingly building. The wound had led to enabling, but the wisdom led to this: a life of clear boundaries, genuine love, and profound, enduring peace. My role was established, my purpose defined. I was ready now to fully embrace the unburdened future. It's been 5 years since I walked out the door and left my history burning in that fireplace. 5 years of clean, consistent, unremarkable freedom. And that, I realized, is the most extraordinary thing of all. The absence of drama is not the absence of life. It is the presence of real, healthy living. My life is no longer a reactive script dictated by Arthur's next crisis. It is a proactive story, written entirely by me. I successfully navigated the financial division of assets, modest, since the inheritance was a lie, and found that the true wealth was the time and energy I had reclaimed. I advanced significantly at work, eventually mentoring younger colleagues who saw me as an island of calm competence. The physical remnants of the wound, the constant tension, the stomach issues, the chronic fatigue, have faded entirely. My body is no longer a tightly wound spring waiting to snap. I learned that emotional safety translates directly into physical health. I now have the energy to pursue my hobbies, to travel simply, and to enjoy long, uninterrupted sleep. That peaceful sleep is, perhaps, the most tangible sign of my liberation. I continue to volunteer at the support center, and my understanding of the toxic cycle has only deepened. I recognize that my entire enabling phase was a prolonged attempt to control the uncontrollable. I believed if I tried hard enough, loved enough, sacrificed enough, I could fix Arthur, thereby securing my own safety from abandonment. The wisdom I share now is rooted in accepting powerlessness over another person's choices. I often speak about the difference between helping and enabling. I draw a simple line for the families I counsel. Helping is doing something for someone that they genuinely cannot do for themselves. Enabling is doing something for them that they can do, thereby preventing them from facing consequences. My journey taught me that enabling is rooted in my own fear, while true helping is rooted in genuine compassion that maintains clear boundaries. Clara, my daughter, is a beacon of this healthy boundary. She established a cordial but extremely distant relationship with Arthur, limiting contact and refusing to engage in his emotional spirals. Her freedom is my continuing joy. She often tells me that seeing my life today, calm, confident, and free, taught her more than any lesson on independence could. That is the highest fulfillment of the protector role. I often reflect on the moment in the diner, reading those shocking words about codependency, and the moment on the phone with Mark, learning the truth about the phantom inheritance. Those jolts of painful truth were not curses. They were gifts. They dismantled the decades-long lie that had been masquerading as love. They forced me to confront the core toxic justification. I'm only like this because I love you so much. That line, that poisonous thesis, is now just a distant memory, completely neutralized by the power of my own truth. I no longer fear solitude. In fact, I cherish it. I discovered that I am not defined by external drama, but by internal peace. I found a partner who is kind, stable, and deeply respectful of my space and my history. Our relationship is based on two whole people coming together to share their lives, not two halves clinging together for survival. He is not my savior, and I am not his caregiver. We simply enjoy each other. That simplicity is the most profound kind of intimacy I have ever known. This is my final message, the summation of the entire arc from the wound to wisdom, from enabler/victim to empowered survivor/protector. If you are listening to this and you recognize the pattern, the constant chaos, the humiliation, the exhausting cycle of cleaning up emotional messes, I want you to hear this truth and take it as your own. You do not owe your pain to anyone else's stability. You do not earn love by sacrificing your sanity. The moment you are told that your suffering is required for someone else's survival, you are being manipulated, not loved. Your worth is inherent. It is not tied to your capacity to fix, to manage, or to endure. The greatest act of love you can commit is the love you extend to yourself. It is choosing the clean, necessary pain of separation over the slow, agonizing death of staying. It is time to discard the toxic thesis that has held you captive. I'm only like this because I love you so much. And it is time to embrace the truth that will set you free, the mantra of your liberation. I can love you without destroying myself in the process. My unburdened future is my proof. Your freedom is waiting for you. All you have to do is take that first terrifying, beautiful step toward the door and never look back. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to Voice of Jenna so you never miss the next chapter in our world of twists, lessons, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world to me, and trust me, the stories only get better from here.